Hi, this is Mrs. DiJulio, and I'm going to give a quick demonstration about how to model in light and shadow some simple building blocks. So, I've already painted my base color for 3 different shaped blocks, and this is the only way really to make them look three-dimensional. So, I'm going to start with my shadows, and I'm just going to pick up some of my red color and just the littlest bit of black to blend in to get my shadow side, which would be this side of this tall red block. And I'm just going to quickly paint it on. And I'm using a flat brush because a flat brush allows me just to press down and then trace right along the edges of the block, and I get a nice clean edge that way. And it's important to have the right size brush for the tool, brush for the job, or tool for the job, because if I'm trying to paint a large area with a little brush, it takes too much time, or a little area with a large brush, it just takes too much skill. So there you go. As simple as that, I've got my dark value established. Then I'm going to add just a little more black to that color because I can see that it's a little bit darker around the edges here. So I'm going to keep turning my paper so that my hand is comfortable, and I'm just going to blend in a little bit of the darkest value here. And there's no reason to get nervous about any of this or frustrated with it, because you can always just paint back over what you do. But it's important to use the littlest amount of paint possible for what you're doing. Otherwise it gets all globby on there, to use a technical term, and it just becomes too hard to manage and you can't control what you're doing. Alright, so I'm going to do the same thing. I see dark edges on the cylinder on both sides, so I'm going to use cross contour strokes, and everybody will remember that from drawing class. A cross contour stroke just is a curved stroke that follows the curve of the object. And while my brush is loaded with paint, I've got paint on both sides, so I'm just going to quickly go up one side and down the other and just blend it a little bit. And I can come back and enhance that a little bit later. And then I'm going to do my last kind of arch or bridge shaped block and get its dark side too. And since the light's not changing in this room, the dark is going to be on the same plane of each of the rectangular solids. So there you go. And I'm probably going a little faster than you'd want to go on your own paintings and projects, but this is just to get the basics. Now I'm going to go back here and notice that this value right under here is also very, very dark. So I'm just going to follow that curve using cross contour strokes and just blend in some dark value. And I'm painting with a fairly sheer kind of acrylic, which is what we have in our classroom, so it allows the underneath colors to show through, which is actually pretty nice. Now notice that I'm rinsing off my brush because I'm going to do more of a middle value now, and that's going to be just the base color of red with just a little bit of black, so not quite as much as we had for doing those really dark values. And you can always adjust if you paint it and it doesn't look quite right to you. When I look at my blocks, I'm going to say that this is the next darkest, and I'm going to paint in the direction that that block plane goes back into space. So I'm not painting up and down, I'm not painting side to side, but I'm painting at the diagonal that it actually goes. And keep in mind too, this is really important, when you're painting blocks like this, because of all the variations of light in our classrooms, they aren't the same value or color even from one end to the other. So you don't need to worry about getting it perfectly the same color from one end to the other. In fact, it will look better if you don't. Now, looking just at details, I see kind of a dark edge, and it's probably some kind of reflection, but I'm just going to lightly paint on a dark edge on the top of that rectangular solid there. And notice how it's a little darker up in here. I wanted it like that. And I'll come back and do the highlights in just a second. So now I'm going to do the middle value on this cylinder. And I'm going to just kind of, it's called glazing, just taking the thin layer of red and going over the whole thing. I'm finding that that is working better to blend in those two dark values on the sides. You know, every time you paint, you encounter something a little bit different and you have to devise a solution for it. So I see it just a tiny bit darker, just like in the rectangular solid. It has really dark areas that are kind of surprising, and I wouldn't know it unless I was actually looking at it. So I'm gonna carefully add them. All right, and then I'm gonna do the same over here. Just because I had that dark on my brush, I went ahead and did it. I could have actually put the middle value down. Your base coat is kind of your middle value, so I guess I'm really saying a middle dark value. All right, so let me mix up that middle dark value. And just like this side of the rectangular solid was the middle dark, this side of the arch is going to be the middle dark. So when I say middle dark, I pick up my base coat, remember, and then just a little bit of a darker value and brush it on like that, and then kind of in there. Okay, and then when you add white to make your highlights to red, you end up getting pink, which we find troubling, some of us. So if you will add just the tiniest bit of yellow, and what I did was mixed our bright yellow and our golden yellow together, and it'll get it a little orangier. And then you pick up the white and add it to that, and it tends to turn it a little less pink. And you can add more yellow if you want, just to get it kind of the color you want. But then you're going to do a dry brush technique. So I'm going to rinse my brush off really good. Always have a cup of water and change that water frequently. When it starts getting sort of thick and doesn't look like water anymore, looks opaque, you need to pour it out and get some more. And I'm going to really clean my brush well and then blot it off so that I can do a dry brush technique. Because to do dry brush, you got to have exactly what it says, a dry brush and not much paint on your brush. So my lightest area is going to be the tops of these, and then right down in here on the bridge. So I'm going to very lightly pick up, and I'm even going to test it over here. I'm going to lightly pick up some of my lightest color, and I'm just going to barely glaze it across the top. It's glazing if it seems kind of glossy, and it's dry brush if it seems kind of matte, which means not glossy. So that's that. And then I see just little hints of light reflection on this side of the block, and I'm just going to kind of try to approximate where I see those. All right, then quickly I'm going to go over here and just do a little light value going right down the center of my cylinder. And I think that's a little too obvious, so I'm going to go back over it and try to blend it in just a little bit more. Like that. And then on my last one, my little bridge, again, I'm going to glaze or dry brush depending on how the paint's going on. This is more of a glaze really, because I think my brush was still kind of damp. And I'm going to put it right in here as well. Notice I'm doing cross contour strokes going around that curve, and I need to feather the edges, which just means lightly brushing over the edges so that they blend a little bit better. Now, if you start adding water when you're doing this, you can start picking up the acrylic and removing it from your paper, and that's really frustrating. So the last thing I've got to do is look at edges. You see I've left my edges the paper color so that I didn't lose where my two planes came together. So now I'm going to go back and look and see which edges are dark and which edges are light. This edge right here on my big rectangular solid is pretty dark. So you don't want to go and put dark edges around everything. That looks a little first grader-ish. So you have to look and see, like, is it dark or is it light? That one happens to be dark, but notice I did kind of a broken line down it so it doesn't look like a hard, heavy outline. Same thing up here. This one is fairly dark, so a broken line again. All right, and then this one, this edge right here is actually light, but I'm not going to just leave the paper showing because that looks a little unfinished. I'm going to actually mix up a little bit of white with my yellow and my red so that it's pretty bright. I think I even want it brighter than that because it's the finishing touch. And then I'm just going to break it right along there, like that. And I see a tiny little highlight right here. This is the finishing touches when you're really looking closely for any little finishing touches you can do with highlights or shadows. So I think that pretty much does that one. Then I think I still want it whiter. I'm going to come over here and I see a really bright white edge right there on my cylinder. And notice it's right above where the lightest part of the cylinder was to begin with. And then, you know, I didn't do the top of the cylinder. Hold on, I need to get that light glaze on there. You see? Okay, and then I think last but not least, I'm going to take my bigger brush again to do the whitest highlights on the bridge or arch shape. And I see almost like a streak. It goes right down here. And remember what I've told you guys about exaggerating what you see? Sometimes, as Picasso told us, it's necessary to tell a lie in order to make it look like the truth. So we have to exaggerate what we see in order for our viewers to really see these blocks as being three-dimensional. So that's sort of what I'm doing. I'm almost just cleaning my brush off here with the light values on the top. Okay, and then I need to do the edges of my bridge, and then we're done. Okay, and notice I've carefully considered every part of these blocks. And I've started with a base coat, then I went to the shadows, then I went to the highlights, and then the extreme highlights. And this edge down here, at least the way I see it, is actually dark. So I'm going to clean my brush really good. If you don't clean the white off your brush and mix it with the black, you're going to get gray. And when you mix the gray with your color, you're going to end up with mud because gray neutralizes it so much. So you really want to take the time, even though it does take time, to clean your brushes off. All right, so I got that, and I'm going to do a little bit right in here. I need to come right there, and then I think I'm going to just hit that back corner. Barely have any paint at all on my brush. And then I can look, this is the very final thing, I can look at my blocks, and if I feel like the top has gotten a little too gray, which it kind of has, I think, on this one in particular, the bridge, I'm just going to leave my brush slightly damp, pick up a little of the base color, which was the red, and just lightly glaze back over that to kind of tone it down. Okay? Kind of like that. So painting is definitely a process of painting in layers, working in layers, looking in layers, seeing in layers, and there you have it. And everything you paint can be painted pretty much just like this.